welcome to episode number 15 of the Dose of Wonder podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin McCall. Have you ever heard the phrase, the early bird gets the worm? Well, I've been wondering, does the early bird always get the worm? I'm going to be exploring that in today's podcast. And is anyone else an early bird that lives with a night owl? I'm a self-proclaimed early bird, trying to make it work with my night owl husband, which might be familiar to a lot of people. I'm sure lots of you can relate to this struggle of the challenges that couples can face when their internal clocks are out of sync. I've always been a morning person, and I've never been good at staying up late, and I prefer to get up early, especially on the weekends, when I can have a good 3 to 4 hours of me time if I get up around 6 a.m. I get up early for work during the week, at 5 a.m. because I start work at 6:30. But that means I'm usually in bed early. Like last night, it was just before 9 p.m., and I was in bed waiting to wind down by reading a book for a bit before getting some shut-eye. But my husband is a night owl. His standard bedtime has always been like 1 or 2 a.m., but he doesn't really have a full-time job outside of the house. Like earlier this week, for instance, he woke up at 10:30 a.m., a full 5.5 hours after me, and I'd already been at work for 4 hours by then. I've tried to stay up past 10 or 10:30, but I very rarely manage it. It annoys my husband because he says we don't get to spend much time together at night, but he's not the one getting up at 5 a.m., when most of the year it's pitch black out for the hours even after I start work. I've never been the type of person to be able to sleep in either, or just lie around in bed. The moment I'm awake, I need to get up. I remember reading about chronotypes, and if you have listened to a previous podcast where I talk about synchronicity, I go into what chrono or chronos means, which is time, and how there are apparently 4 different types of sleepers based on our circadian rhythms. Not just the stereotypical early bird or morning lark versus night owl. And they're animal-based for some reason. The 4 types are lion, bear, dolphin, and wolf. Lions are the early birds, productive in the morning, but they find it difficult to be social at night. And then there's the bears. Most people are bears. They like the 9 to 5, but are also good at being social in the evenings. Wolves are the old-fashioned night owls, and only about 15% of people are truly night owls. Dolphins are the insomniacs of the bunch. Perhaps that's my husband, who sometimes even comes to bed at 3 or 4 in the morning. But I'm curious if there are any other couples that are night owls and early birds, and how do you make your differences work? Do you nap in order to stay up later? I try to do that, but napping doesn't seem to help. I still get tired around 9, 9:30, 10, even if I have a coffee. My body just seems wired to get tired around 9 p.m. And I'm amazed on the days when I rarely sleep in and wake up at about 8 a.m. instead of my usual 6 a.m. on my days off. Whereas 8 a.m. for my significant other is an ungodly hour. So I'd love to hear how people with warring sleep patterns or chronotypes work things out, because my husband and I seem to be out of sync by about 5 hours, give or take. Are there any lions and dolphins out there? So let's break down some of these basics a little more. The animal-based chronotypes, lions, bears, wolves, and dolphins, is a fun way to categorize these natural sleep-wake tendencies. And it's important to remember those categories are based on our circadian rhythms, those internal biological clocks that govern so much more than just our sleep. We're talking about things like hormone production, energy levels, and even our cognitive function throughout the day. So it's not just about who likes to sleep in. So we have the lions, like me, your classic early birds, super productive in the morning, fading as the day goes on. But that got me thinking. So if there are energy dips later in the day, does that mean they're missing out on prime social time? which is a good question. And research suggests that, lions often do struggle with socializing in the evening. That is me 100%. But also, I'm an introvert, so socializing in general is hard for me. But socializing and at night, that's a big nope right there. And that can lead to some friction in a relationship if your partner thrives on those late night activities. Think about it. A lion's 6 a.m. can be a wolf's midnight, which is a huge difference. No wonder those late night talks can be so hard to coordinate. So then we've got the bears, which, as I said earlier, are described as being kind of most common and adaptable type. Bears are generally in sync with that typical 9 to 5 workday, making them a bit more flexible when it comes to both morning and evening activities. It's the sweet spot, the best of both worlds. And then you've got those mysterious wolves who are the true night owls. If you're a wolf, you come alive when most of us are getting ready for bed. But they make up about 15% of the population are true wolves, and their peak performance times often clash with societal norms, which can be challenging in a world structured around that 9 to 5 workday. And you can imagine how this might lead to some unique relationship dynamics, especially with a partner who's more of an early bird, like my husband and I. We both spend large chunks of time alone while the other is asleep. Me in the morning when I get up early, and he's sleeping till mid-morning, and him at night when I go to bed, quote-unquote, early, and he's up for another 3 or 4 hours by himself, just him and our dog. But let's not forget the dolphins. They are the ones who struggle to find a consistent sleep pattern at all. They're the insomniacs. Like I said at the start about how my husband might be a dolphin because he sometimes doesn't go to bed until 3 or 4 a.m., it highlights the fact that in reality, not everyone fits neatly into these chronotype categories. There's a spectrum, and some people fall somewhere in between. So we've got this fascinating mix of chronotypes, each with its own unique rhythm. But how do these differences actually play out in a relationship? I've shared how my early to bed, early to rise tendency clashes with my husband's late night preferences, leading to limited shared time in the evenings. I'm only awake for a couple of hours of TV watching together, which can be frustrating, for my husband anyway. But it's not just missing out on movie nights or those late night chats together. Studies show that couples with mismatched chronotypes often struggle with coordinating social activities as well, which can impact their overall relationship satisfaction. So it's a bigger issue than just who gets to control the remote at night. Think about it. A lion's peak cortisol levels, those that drive alertness, they happen much earlier in the day than a wolf's. So asking a wolf to be just as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at 7 a.m. as their lion partner is like asking them to function on a whole different operating system, which is an analogy that really highlights that biological reality of these differences. There's that old saying that the early bird gets the worm that I mentioned at the start, which kind of implies that early risers are inherently more successful or something. But does that hold true when we look at chronotypes and their impact on things like career success or personal fulfillment? That's actually a common misconception. It's not about one chronotype being better than another. Each has its own strengths and ideal times for productivity, creativity, and even relationship building. The key is understanding your own rhythm and recognizing that your partners might be different, and then leveraging those strengths. So it's not a competition. It's more like a dance where each partner has their own unique moves. But what happens when those dance moves clash? Is there any hope for couples with these mismatched chronotypes like me and my husband Michael? Or are they just doomed to a lifetime of sleep-deprived arguments? Well, there's definitely hope. And it all starts with, you might know the answer to this if you've listened to any of my other podcasts, because it seems to be the common answer to a lot of things. Awareness. Once you understand your chronotype and recognize that others have their own unique rhythms, you can start to navigate those differences with more empathy and compassion. So you might have always considered yourself a night owl, but after learning about this whole chronotype thing, you might be like, wait a minute, I might actually be a bear, but leaning towards wolf. Maybe you're wondering, could this be why I feel so much more creative and focused in the evenings? And if you're in a relationship with someone who's more of a lion or a bear leaning towards lion, those differences in peak performance times, that could definitely create some friction. So how do we make this stance work when our partners are on completely different beats? As I talked about earlier, about my wanting to connect with my husband in the evenings, but I just can't fight my biology and stay up late. So there's this way to find that compromise without sacrificing your natural rhythm. It all boils down to the 3 C's: communication, compromise, and a bit of creativity. Instead of trying to change each other, focus on understanding and respecting each other's natural rhythms. For example, maybe the lion partner can enjoy some quiet time in the morning while the wolf is still asleep, like I do. I use that time in the morning to do my morning yoga and meditation routine and maybe work on some writing. And then you can plan a late breakfast together when the wolf is more alert. So it's all about finding those pockets of time where you can connect, even if your schedules don't perfectly align. And remember, compromise is a 2-way street. Me, as the lion, might need to make an effort to stay up a little later some nights, while the wolf could try waking up a bit earlier on the weekends to have some shared time. But I know my wolfy husband would never wake up earlier unless there's an important reason, like a work call or getting a flight or something. But it might mean getting creative instead of dinner dates, like trying a weekend brunch or a midday museum visit. Finding a balance is the key here. But what about those times when compromise just isn't enough? Like when one partner has an early morning commitment and the other one wants to stay out late. That's where the open and honest communication comes in. Talk about your needs, your expectations, and try to find solutions that work for both of you. Maybe one partner can sleep in a guest room occasionally or use noise-canceling headphones to block out the other's late-night activities. I have to close the bedroom door when I go to bed early, and my husband is still up watching TV downstairs or recording his podcast. It's about being mindful and respectful of each other's sleep needs and preferences, which is sometimes easier said than done. And don't underestimate the importance of carving out that dedicated time for each other, even if it's just for a few minutes each day. Maybe you have coffee together in the morning, or a quick chat before bed. These little rituals can go a long way to helping maintain a strong connection. And remember, sometimes you just have to agree to disagree. Not every activity has to be done together. It's healthy for each partner to have their own interests and hobbies that they can pursue during their peak energy times, which is an important point to remember, respecting each other's individuality within the relationship. And sometimes that means embracing those quiet moments of solitude, even if it's just for a little while. Maybe you're already thinking about how you can apply these ideas to your own relationships. So far, we've been focusing on romantic relationships here, but could this whole chronotype awareness thing be helpful in other relationships too, like with family members or even co-workers? Absolutely. It's so easy to get frustrated, right? When your teenager seems to live on an internal schedule or your colleague is just dragging in the mornings. But understanding their chronotypes can completely change how we approach those relationships. It's almost like having a secret decoder ring for understanding people. Like, oh, that's why they do that. Imagine knowing why your teenager is practically nocturnal or why your colleague is so much more productive in the afternoon. It could totally change the way we approach those relationships. And instead of getting frustrated, we can try to adapt and work together more effectively. If you know your child is a wolf, you might reconsider those early morning chores or allow them to study later at night when they're more alert. Understanding chronotypes could lead to more flexible schedules and increased productivity. Instead of scheduling that brainstorming session for 8 a.m., maybe aim for mid-afternoon when their wolves are hitting their creative stride. The implications are huge. It's like this whole new lens for understanding ourselves and the people around us. Just think of how much smoother family life would be, or even work projects could be, if we just took chronotypes into account. And it all starts with, as I said earlier, and in previous podcasts, awareness. Once you understand your own chronotype and recognize that others have their own unique rhythms, you can start to navigate those differences with more empathy and compassion. As I said, it's like a secret code to unlocking better relationships. So, to recap, we've learned that chronotypes are more than just about when we like to sleep. They're tied to our biology and can have a big impact on our energy levels or focus, even our personality traits throughout the day. And while mismatched chronotypes can create challenges in relationships, they don't have to be a deal breaker. With the 3 C's of communication, compromise, and creativity, you can find ways to make it work. It's like finding that perfect harmony in a song, even when you're playing different instruments. So what does that song mean for you? I encourage you to think about your own chronotype and the chronotypes of people in your life. Here's this week's question to ponder. How might this new understanding help you navigate those relationships with more empathy and understanding? Perhaps you'll find that you and your partner have more compatible chronotypes than you realized. Or maybe you'll discover that those frustrating differences are actually rooted in biology. Whatever you discover, remember that knowledge is power, and with a little understanding, you can turn those differences into strengths and build stronger, more harmonious relationships, both at home and at work. And who knows, you might even find that embracing those differences adds a little more spice to life. And that's all I have about the fascinating world of chronotypes. Next week, we'll be diving into self-improvement with how to cultivate meaning, purpose, and happiness. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, tune in next Sunday. Until then, thanks for listening, and don't forget to live with a dose of wonder.